As of recording this podcast series, we have been in quarantine or some form of lockdown for nearly 10 months. Over 430,000 people have died in the US alone, and nearly 26 million cases across the United States. Tens of thousands of school districts are closed. Millions of students are in online learning. Millions more are participating in a hybrid model, and all are suffering under the tremendous burdens of living and operating via Zoom, devoid of family and friend interactions. This is episode 1 of Pandemic Pass. Where are we now? This episode seeks to determine our baseline. Where are we as an education system? With our first episode of Pandemic Pass, we want to take a look at where we are as a public education system, the 30,000-foot view. And we're going to do that by having a discussion with someone who is perfect for talking about the 30,000-foot view of an education system. It's with Des Moines, Iowa Public School Superintendent Dr. Thomas Ahart. Ahart has been at the helm of DMPS since 2012 and has provided exceptional leadership throughout the COVID-19 crisis and subsequent school closures in spite of the many political challenges that have come across his desk. Dr. Ahart was also featured in a Washington Post article this past fall for how he is navigating his school system in a state governed by a close ally of the now former President Trump. In spite of Dr. Ahart's push to close schools, his decision was summarily overruled on the first day of distance learning for Des Moines students. You can imagine how disruptive that would be, considering you've planned for so long and all of a sudden you're told to force students to go back. That very day, an Iowa judge ruled that they must open schools for in-person instruction, despite the fact that coronavirus cases in Des Moines were skyrocketing and the fact that over a third of Des Moines school staff have pre-existing conditions and that cases were exceeding expert baselines for when it is actually safe to return to classrooms. I really hope you enjoy this interview with Dr. Ahart. I think in times of crisis, what I hope you get out of this interview is the fact of how important school leadership is. When you are going through post-secondary education and learning through your teacher programs, you often hear the importance of, or the refrain that leadership is super important, or that it's so important to have a strong and learned school leader. And I feel like a lot of teachers, including myself, I would include myself in that camp for the first few years of my career, felt that the leadership of a school or a school system was not important. And when you look at an example like Dr. Ahart's leadership throughout this crisis, it proves and shows not only how important the superintendency is, but how important it is for the superintendent to build the leadership capacity of those around him or her as they are navigating these crises. I hope you enjoy this first episode of Pandemic Pass. I think Dr. Ahart is a tremendous person, a tremendous school leader, and it was really great talking to him, and I was so glad to have the time to speak with him in his busy day. We talked about the 30,000-foot view of where the current state of public education is. We talked about his reaction to the ruling in the feature on the Washington Post and what about the views and decisions that were made. And we talk about what kind of lessons he hopes to impart upon other school districts and district leaders about his experience to make his school system stronger and more resilient in the future. I hope you enjoy this first episode, and again, please leave us feedback and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Dr. Ahart, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Pandemic Pass, as you know, is about assessing where we are in our education systems across the country and figuring out how we most effectively emerge from this pandemic stronger and more innovative than before. So as superintendent, you see this crisis from the 30,000-foot view, but also from interacting in your local community and on the ground. What's your take on the current state of public education and where we are right now?
well, broadly speaking, I think that at this very moment, I think there's a number of I describe it. I think in a number of ways. One is that for anyone paying attention, I think it's become very evident just how much our communities rely on our public schools. So I think that's hopefully, I'm hopeful that will be a broad takeaway from our non-educational community, because certainly it as it relates to the economy, there's been an awful lot of pressure put on schools to continue to function as close to normal as possible, to enable a whole bunch of other things in the community to happen. And then I think it's been much more visible just what a key component our public schools are in connecting the most disadvantaged in our communities to resources not directly tied to school. That's something that we do, I think, exceedingly well all the time, but it's rather invisible work,
right?
Most of the time, that's appreciated by those who need it, and a lot of other folks just aren't aware that it's happening. So I'm hopeful that will be one positive coming out of the pandemic. I think it's from another perspective, though. In our state, and it's not unique to our state, school funding has been a real challenge particularly over the last decade. We've just seen very consistent, record low state funding in Iowa, while at the same time, in Des Moines and as well as many other places across the country, the percentage of students that we're serving who qualify for free and reduced price lunch, and the percentage of students that are coming from a genuinely trauma-based situation, and the percentage of kids who don't speak English as their primary language. All of those challenges have continued to grow, while at the same time funding has been headed in another direction. And so school districts, particularly urban districts, have really been stretched very, very thin. And there's this interesting nexus here during the pandemic where it becomes more evident, I think, to more people just how many behind the scenes, not directly educational functions that we're really required to do so that we can do job one, which is providing educational opportunities for young people. So I would say right now the state of education, and I had a Zoom meeting earlier today with a number of superintendents from around the country, urban superintendents, and we're all in some way, shape, or form in the same boat. I would say that the state of education is very stressed.
Yeah.
We're strained. Our teachers are working harder than they've ever worked, doing work that's different than it's ever been in the past. And that's really true for just about everybody in the organization. And it's been going on too long with too much uncertainty. And it's just hard to keep standing tall when the sand is shifting, underneath you. It requires a lot more energy just to do the basics.
Yeah, I think you make a super good point about just the fact that we take for granted some of the institutions that we rely on to be there all the time. And now that schools are largely closed across the country, where, parents and communities are struggling to fill that void. And, I hope that we come out of this in a way more valuing what our public education systems are here to do. So you made national news. Sometimes people say we don't want to get in the news at all, but you made national news for bucking the governor of your state's expectation that you all return to in-person learning. And I just want to, we read the Washington Post around here pretty frequently, but it was reported that on the first day of virtual classes in Des Moines this year, an Iowa judge ruled that the school system must abide by a state mandate and open schools for face-to-face instruction, even as coronavirus cases in the city and across the state surge far beyond what experts say is safe. What was your reaction to this ruling, and how have you and your school system adapted to meet this challenge to your views and your decisions?
Yeah, that that continues to be a challenge for us. We we were really in the front of the line in being proactive in response to COVID-19 back in March, and after by the end of March, beginning of April, we were really trying to think forward because it was becoming more and more apparent that at least the remainder of the FY19 school year was going to, in large part, be a loss. And so we had done my team and I did a lot of research, consulted with some of the best public health and infectious disease experts in the country. We're very fortunate just to reach out to some folks that we learned were leaders, and they were generous with their time and their expertise.
Yeah.
And we came up with a plan for the fall that met all of the at the time all of the requirements of the state. And we're large for our state, so we have to move early to get everything done in a timely manner. And so we complied with everything the state had required up to that point. At the end of June, we announced our return to learn plan,
right,
and started registering students. And then about 9,000 students in, the state said that all students who don't select fully virtual need to receive half of their instruction in person every 2 weeks.
Wow. That's quite a change.
Yeah, quite a change. Now, our plan at the time was just about there for elementary and middle, so we could make some tweaks to that. Not ones we were comfortable with, but ones that could actually get us to that 50%. But at high school, it was literally a choice between following the governor's mandate or abandoning any modicum of mitigation.
Wow.
Which the judge actually, recognized in his decision. But we were caught between a rock and a hard place. As the summer progressed, and we wrestled with this challenge, conditions, as you stated, continued to get worse. And my recommendation was that we start the year fully virtual, and the board, our school board, supported that. So we made that decision, and at the same time filed for that injunction, which ironically was decided on the first day of school.
Great timing.
Great, yeah, it was fantastic timing. And so we were just in what seemed to be a completely lose-lose situation. We could comply. We didn't have any desire to be out of compliance with the state. We don't have a record of doing that, but you can't, what I told my board is I can't unknow what I know. And we've looked at our buildings and our staff, and as we were talking about previously, the very, very small amount of flexibility we have because finances are just so tight. And by the way, what CARES Act dollars we received from the federal government, we had to expend all of those to close out the previous year.
Right.
So we were operating in a worse than net neutral budget because we, like many other districts around the country, we lost enrollment, especially at pre-K and kindergarten. So we were in a really tight spot. Ultimately, pressure began to mount. Especially when the governor then said that if you were in fully virtual, students couldn't participate in extracurricular activities. So then there started to be some pressure from a number of families who wanted us to be all virtual, but also wanted their children to be able to participate.
Sure.
In extracurriculars. So the political pressure really mounted, and finally, being uncomfortable with the metrics that our state had put out that would qualify us to apply for a waiver,
yeah,
to be virtual for 2 weeks. our board created its own set of metrics. And we eventually returned back to school, but we were only in-person classes at the high school for a week, before conditions had just gotten so, they just continued to get worse.
Yep.
So largely because of not very much testing happening over the Thanksgiving weekend, we've seen our case rates and our positivity rate go down slightly, but every prediction is that those are going to climb back up once everybody's sort of back into the regular routine and testing again, and then it's probably going to go higher than it had before because of what we anticipate being a bump from Thanksgiving get-togethers. So, we continue to have this tension because my board right now and I are talking about, we've applied for 2 waivers now, 2 successive waivers, and received those. But what's going to happen if, the positivity rate dips below 15%?
Right.
Will the state give us another one? That's the question. And so that's actually one of the most frustrating things, is not being able to lay out any certainty for our staff and for our families more than 2 weeks at a time, and that whiplash effect of being all virtual and then coming back into some form of in-person, and any momentum that our teachers have generated and any kind of a groove that they get going with their classes gets thrown off track, and we lose even more valuable instructional time.
And in that decision that you made and your board made about going back all virtual, I mean, it was an inherently a risky political decision for you. What kind of lessons do you hope that other district leaders could take from your experience?
Well, excuse me. I think that the safe bet is always to just do as you're told. These are extraordinary circumstances, and certainly they're I would say doubly extraordinary, because not only is this, the CD or the World Health Organization calls this not the worst pandemic in a generation. They're calling it the worst pandemic in 10 generations. And we're trying to navigate this still little understood disease in what might be the most polarized political environment that this country has ever endured. And that the level of polarization, very individual locale to individual locale, but what we're seeing, what I believe we're seeing at the local level in terms of this tension between how, with education in the pandemic, whether to just forge on, and try to ride it out and keep things as normal as possible, or to really have safety as the top priority, that tension has just been, magnified by the already existing polarization. And I'm hearing things come out of people's mouths that just really blow me away. People that I've known for a number of years, and it just seems that if you land on one side of the fence, you're required to believe, this whole catalog of ideas, and if you're on the other side of the fence, you're required to believe this whole other catalog of ideas. And there just seems to be very little room for having civil, productive, science-based conversations about how to forge ahead. And there's certainly no one size fits all, especially when you're navigating an urban school system in these kind of conditions. And so that's probably been the most frustrating and elucidating thing that I've pulled away. You can't, you all should, everybody should always be, thinking for themselves, of course, and, and hoping and for the most part, trusting that your state leadership and federal leadership have everyone's best interests at heart. But ultimately the local leader has a unique set of circumstances and really need to, I think, assess the local situation in as informed a way as possible, and come to their best conclusions there, and then it's a matter of deciding. I guess it's in a lot of ways deciding which hill you want to die on. This is one that I thought was worthy.
Yeah, for sure. My last question has to do with your vision. Perhaps a more positive and optimistic question is how do we as an education system emerge from this better, stronger, more responsive, more innovative? And as a superintendent, what does this look like and sound like to you?
That's a great question. We in Des Moines, we created a virtual high school a couple of years ago.
Sure.
And the expertise that we built in opening that school, which was the only school in the state that didn't close down last spring, by the way. We had some expertise to draw on in trying to prep the rest of our staff to operate in a virtual environment. But what I think I'm seeing, and I think our teachers would echo this. We have some teachers who I think, because they were forced into a different modality, have found some techniques and some tools that have always been available, but weren't viewed as necessary. And they're seeing that some students really connect better.
Yeah, for sure.
Through a device. So, what I'm hopeful for, and this is what we're trying to actively capture, is what, despite all of these challenges and frustrations, what is it that's really working, and how do we harvest that and integrate that into what we hope will feel more like normal, in the next year and a half or 2 years. And then, but from the bigger picture level, one of the challenges with innovation and education are some, in my view, antiquated concepts that are really ingrained in policy, like the Carnegie unit, and, we've had to be flexible. Our teachers have just been really phenomenal. They've been creative, they've been nimble, and students, have responded, some way better than we expected, and some not as well as we would have anticipated.
Yeah, I have students who are taking super rigorous courses and pathways who are struggling, and then we have other students who typically are, for lack of a better term right now, but in the shadows, and they don't want to be, they don't make a lot of noise, but they're doing great.
Yeah. So I think I'm hopeful that from a policy perspective, that that education leaders across the country and policymakers across the country, because of what we're seeing through the pandemic, can maybe loosen up a little bit and take a broader view of what do we really want from our education system, and are the policies that we have in place right now encouraging that, or really providing more hurdles than are necessary. We have one of our biggest challenges right now is at the high school level is with our career tech courses, and we have students taking some classes for concurrent enrollment, and we actually had an exception for them initially when we were in all virtual because they need a certain amount of lab time. And we're certainly seeing that's really necessary, and that they really thrive in that. But there's some other places where we probably should be doing things differently, even when we can get back to normal. So I think there's some real opportunity here, but I don't think we'll really realize the real advantages that we could, unless we're willing to really take some hard look at current policy and reforming that in a manner that allows our educators to be more innovative without paying a penalty.
Yeah. Well, it's well said, and I think that's a great end cap to our discussion. And I think, a more positive and optimistic tone, perhaps than
Sure.
we've been talking about for the last 9 months.
For sure.
So Dr. Ahart, thank you so much for taking time out of your super busy day, and I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me on Pandemic Pass. And I'd love to get you on the show for Ed's Not Dead at some point with Robbie and Peter. And we hope you and your family are doing well. And I want to thank you personally for just your leadership during this crazy time. Like, being a school leader in a district, any district really is challenging. And so I appreciate the work that you're doing and navigating this for us.
I look forward to our next conversations.
Yeah.
Thanks
a lot, and have a great day.
Yep. Be well.
Thank you for joining us on Pandemic Pass. Pandemic Pass is a pulp education production and was written and directed by me, Casey Siddons. Music was written and performed by Peter Craven. Thanks for listening. Be sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It helps others find us.